Hi everyone, I'm Anna, and I'm a senior user researcher at a health tech company called Babylon Health. And I'm here to chat about some work that me and the amazing team there have done around designing voice chatbot experiences. And the topic here is quite different to the ones that you've heard before, I think. It's just sharing a little bit about one approach that we've used to design automated voice chat experiences, which really starts by taking a close look at how conversations occur between humans first, even before you start doing any solution design or engineering work. And hopefully this will give you some inspiration for some of the stuff that you're doing, bit of a jumping off point. First, just a shout out to the amazing team, so Ben, who's here, and Jessie, who's actually a junior doctor, who's joined our team. They've done a lot of this kind of product and UX thinking as well, so just wanted to acknowledge them. Okay, back to the core presentation. So because this is based on work that we've done at Babylon Health, it helps to give you a bit of context about what we're trying to achieve there. So as you walk into the building, this is what you'll see, and this is our mission. So we believe in putting an accessible and affordable healthcare service in the hands of everyone on earth. So obviously super challenging, but super meaningful. And by the way, if this mission resonates with you and you're interested, we're hiring across all different roles, and I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end. Okay, so the crux of this is taking the healthcare system today, which is quite unscalable, and somehow scaling it so that it now becomes available to people who wouldn't have access to it otherwise. And what's one of the big limitations of scale? Cost. And what's one of the most expensive things around healthcare? Human doctors. So one way to think about achieving this mission and really scaling healthcare is to think about how we might, in appropriate situations, replace doctors with automated systems. And if we think about the kind of automated system that could be really suitable for this, well, voice is really critical for a number of reasons. So talking to a voice chatbot is more closely comparable to talking to a doctor. A voice experience is more accessible to people with different physical capabilities. So again, this kind of notion of accessibility. And also you can imagine that we could deliver a voice experience in the UK through some of the devices we have in our pockets, for example, but also in more developing countries through a mobile phone that's even pre-feature phone. So voice is really interesting to us. So I guess, one of these big how might we questions that we're dealing with is, in order to achieve the scale and mission, how might we replace a human doctor with Alexa, and when is it appropriate to do so? And what are some of the possibilities and some of the pitfalls? And I think when you're confronted with this really big question, like how might we replace a doctor with Alexa, for example, in certain circumstances, I think it can be hard to know where to start, right? So maybe the temptation is to grab your team and go into a room and try have a workshop with a bunch of post-its where you try to figure out, okay, what is the solution going to be like? How are we going to do this? And the approach that I want to advocate for today, and which we feel has worked quite well for us, is actually taking a step back from the solution and really giving yourself time and space to look at how conversations are happening today and what you can learn from them. And I know there's always this tension, right, about innovating and looking forward and having that solution in mind. But this is a kind of advocating for really taking a step back and trying to learn from the world today. I want to take a quick example which skims the surface but hopefully gives you a sense of what this means. So let's take a conversation that happens today between a human doctor and a human patient. Now, if we look at a consultation today, it's kind of deceptively simple, right? I mean, we've all been to the doctor at least a few times since we were kids. And if you think, if you try to describe what a consultation is, well, you go to a doctor, you tell them what's wrong with you, and they give you some outcomes. So I think it feels quite deceptively simple. But actually, if you take a little bit of time to look a bit closer, there is actually actually specific stages and an order and a purpose to things in that conversation. And I encourage you to kind of think back to the last time you saw a doctor. So maybe what happened is, you entered the room and then the doctor asked a really open-ended question like, oh, hello, hi Anna, how are you, how can I help? So what they were doing is trying to invite you to kind of tell the story of what's wrong and what you think matters and why. And maybe you were trying to sound quite like informed and not too hypochondriacal and reasonable, and you described something to them. And then maybe next what happened is the doctor would have asked you a series of questions to try and pull out some more information or gain some clarification. And you in turn may have also asked them for some more clarification if you didn't understand their questions. And then maybe after some time of kind of these more targeted questions, they would have gathered enough information and given you an outcome like, oh, it's probably just a cold or you need an x-ray or something. So it turns out that a conversation that feels quite simple actually has stages and everything has an order and a purpose. So for example, this initial part of a consultation, these really open-ended questions, have been called sometimes a kind of golden minute of the consultation. So golden because the doctor's really getting some of those real golden nuggets from the patient, and minute because it usually lasts a minute. And again, if you dig into these things, you'll see that in order for this part of the conversation to be successful, there are really important things that a doctor will do. So open-ended questions are really important. So the how can I help, these really open-ended ones, are important to draw out and kind of give the patient space to speak. Also, the doctor will use kind of silence to really invite the patient to say everything that they feel they need to say. And also the doctor will be doing a lot of active listening, so a lot of like, nodding, sorry to hear that. And the second phase, and maybe you can call it a Q&A phase, and it has some similarities to the golden minute, but it's actually quite distinct. So the priority here from the doctor side in supporting the part of this conversation is more targeted questions. So rather than how can I help, it will be really trying to hone in and understand and unpack, when did the pain start, try to get some of those details, but active listening will be ongoing. And then if we call the last stage, say we call it an outcome stage, so what really matters here is that the doctor provides a really simple message, but also explains why they think that that outcome is the right one. So this is by no means at all a thorough picture of what happens in a consultation, but I hope that it gives you a sense that by taking a conversation that happens today and unpacking it, you can start to see some of the stages and what works and what matters in those kinds of conversations today and why. And this single conversation, there have literally been like books written on it. I think we all, because we're so excited about the future, sometimes we have a tendency to simplify, and I think this is a case study of where it's really worth taking a moment to really understand what happens today. And also, I think if you dig into it, you'll see that what a doctor does has both a functional and an emotional purpose. So obviously, functionally, they're trying to collect enough information to give a kind of clinically accurate outcome. But they also are trying to make sure the patient feels heard, that even if the patient says something clinically irrelevant, that they have the chance to express themselves. And why understanding this, for example, matters for us who are trying to build these kind of automated voice experiences is, in traditional healthcare, it's very unlikely that a patient will get up in the middle of a consultation and leave the room. Or it's even fairly challenging to change your GP practice, for example. But for us, it's really easy for someone to stop using the Alexa skill or the voice experience and go and use one of the alternative services available to them. So we think that to provide something really excellent, we need to serve functional and emotional purpose. We need to serve those needs, and I think by looking at the current conversation, we really understand what those needs are and what needs to be done to serve those. And I think the bigger gist as well is that even conversations that feel quite simple can take a lot of work. And of course, this is true for consultations, as we've unpacked, but also, look next time at, in a non-creepy way, At people ordering coffee, for example, there are a lot of cases where it just feels really simple, but if you take a moment to look at conversation today, it can be more complicated than you expect. Okay, so let's say you've had a look at conversations today. The next stage is to start prototyping. And the key thing here, again, is to momentarily suspend your understanding of technical and regulatory constraints and build a Wizard of Oz prototype that captures what you think would be close to the kind of things that a human doctor provides. And a Wizard of Oz prototype, for those of you not familiar, is one where the audio is hard-coded or pre-programmed and there's a human person triggering and playing the different audio. But it's done in such a way that the person using the system has no idea that it's not smart and acting on its own. And the idea here is obviously, given that human-human conversation is so complex, is not to get stuck and is not to try to prototype every single bit of the conversation. So let's say you wanted to prototype and explore how you support the golden minute. The key thing is to try to think, okay, what are like the top 3 things that a doctor does that we want to play with? So it may be, as I mentioned before, open-ended questions which you pre-record. It may be the role of silence, so you may, as the person conducting the Wizard of Oz, make sure you leave silences and pauses. And in terms of active listening, it may be like pre-recording things like and sorry to hear that. So again, it's just trying to give yourself a starting point and a sense, trying to start to test what you think matters and why. And then you just put it in front of some people and you see how it plays out. And a lot of the analysis you do at this point is really qualitative. So apologies, the picture is a little hard to get a sense of what's going on. But this is some Wizard of Oz testing that we did. On the right, you just see peeking out is a laptop. And behind that is Jessie, my colleague. And she's pre-recorded these open-ended questions. She's looking to simulate kind of inviting silences, for example, those key characteristics. And then we have the Amazon device on the desk, and it's actually just a Bluetooth speaker for the laptop. But the participant, he's none the wiser. He thinks this is a real thing. And what you're looking for is quite qualitative. So have a look at what seems to flow, what seems to surprise the participant. So is it true that when you give them an inviting silence that they really fill that silence or speak, or does something else happen? So you're looking at what the participant will say, obviously, but also how they're behaving. Are they settling into a conversation, or do they feel really uncomfortable? And that will give you a lot of really in-depth learning about what may or may not work if you try to take some of the competencies and abilities of doctors and put it into an automated system. And then what you can do is you can take the framework that you built up from the first round, for example, of these stages, and you can start to understand how those played out in testing. So, for example, you may see that in testing, something that we've seen occasionally is, although people will speak freely to a doctor, they won't speak freely with Alexa. And that's because a lot of the skills that exist are kind of single statement commands. The question is, can we overcome that? It doesn't matter. Do we feel that that really matters from a functional and emotional perspective? Inviting silences, let's say we see that really matters. Technically, it can be quite hard to support in a skill today. So again, it's about thinking about, does it matter? If we can't support it today, can we get close to it, or can we come to support it in time, and why? And then the other thing, of course, for example, you'll see here is if you let people speak freely, and you try to parse out information from that, that's a really challenging technical task in terms of NLP, natural language processing. But what you can see through testing is maybe is there some part of what users say that matters most that you can start with? If they mention a disease they're worried about, is that really a key piece of information where even though you can't parse out everything, you can parse out that? And do you feel that is the really important thing based on what you've seen in the studies? So the idea is you can start to prioritize and really understand the value of different bits of functionality, what's worth going down, which route it's worth going down, and which it's not. So, I hope I didn't disappoint you in that this approach doesn't tell you 1, 2, 3 exactly what you need to do. But I think what it will give you is a starting point and starting to think at the early stages of designing your experience. It will help you avoid reinventing the wheel. So you learn from doctors, you learn from yourselves, from how we conduct conversations in the real world, and what really matters and why, and bringing that forward into voice. You also take a moment to understand people's pre-existing mental models. So when people are using Alexa, they don't just get amnesia about everything that they've experienced in their life so far. They bring into that experience their previous conversations with doctors, their expectations around that, around using other voice experiences. And so this as an approach, I think, really helps you to understand that. And I think quite importantly, it gives you kind of a framework to start with, and some opening questions that will help you progress pretty quickly. So I would encourage you to think about, obviously there are kind of more complex interactions like a consultation or conversations that occur over a long period of time, but also think about the kinds of conversations that you're supporting in your skill now or plan to, and think if there is a human equivalent that you can learn from, because even the simplest conversations, as I said, like ordering a cup of coffee, can be quite complicated if you just carve out a little bit of that time to understand it. And thank you. I'd love to connect with you, and also if the mission or anything that I mentioned today resonates with you, we're hiring across all roles, product, UX, engineering, so would love to answer any questions, and yeah, hopefully hear from you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. We've got some questions down here.
Hello, I'm Nick. I wanted to follow up on the emotional side of it. I agree that when people go to the doctors, it's more than just a functional, it's an emotional side that they're looking to get. But do we have any evidence that that's what people want from an automated experience? Do they want that emotional connection with something that's possibly not going to share that same feeling or emotional connection? And is it something ethically we should be doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We always, at Babylon traditionally, we always err towards transparency. So we always work within the constraints that upfront we're very honest that it's an automated system. I think even within that, we think that we can deliver something of value. And sometimes, I don't know, it's even really simple, like sometimes just having a venue that as a person you can express yourself and you know that there is something there that's going to help you and guide you. And we found that also in existing Alexa skills, like people really value that, and they build emotional connections in a different way to another human. It's still, you can have an automated service that fulfills a need, and you can still know that it's automated. I mean, we found in our testing that people can really build connections with their device and with an automated system, but of course, to your point, it's a bit different to a connection from another human. And I think on our side, we always try to be transparent that it's automated. Did that answer your question? Oh, and also, I think we found in other research as well, it's quite interesting how different people define what a good doctor is. So this is also a really interesting question. So some people really like doctors that are quite direct. So I come to you, I'll tell you what's wrong, we'll work through it and tell me what to do. Other people really like doctors who see them as whole people who ask about their lives outside of consultations. And so I think it's quite interesting. I think there's an opportunity to create some really meaningful segments as well in terms of people's personal preferences for like what is a good consultation or kind of chat experience.
I have a question, sorry.
Did Ben tell you this question?
No, he didn't. Alexa, there was a study earlier this year that suggests that about half of all interactions with Alexa take place with someone else in the room. They are, by their nature, communal devices, but speaking to a doctor is inherently a private conversation. And how do you kind of square that circle, or circle that square?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think I would maybe give a two-part answer. I think the first is, in a way, we also see that as an opportunity, because there are often scenarios where you might have an elderly parent or a child, and having a device in the home might help you get some assistance for them. So I think there are certain scenarios where it's an opportunity, and it's quite good that the skill would be really integrated into a home, maybe among groups of people where privacy isn't that much of an issue. There are some opportunities there. I think the second part is that, so in consultations today, we offer video consultations. What we do there is the doctor, as part of the first part of the consultation, will always ask the person if they're in a private place, and if they're not, actually won't continue the consult and wait for them to move there. So I think you're right, like as we get closer to bringing this to market, we'll probably need, again, learning from kind of conversation that happens today between two humans, we'll probably need something like that where the consultation won't proceed until a person, we've double checked with them that they're in a private space.
You've touched on this briefly, but I mean, when you're talking about people preferring different types of doctors, I would argue that people might not know, or you would hope that a doctor would still be able to pick up on signs. Let's say if someone's depressed, how would you kind of fill that space if you have someone that's going to get treated for X, Y, or Z, but they don't have the face-to-face conversation, so that a doctor, you would hope a general practitioner would be able to pick up on signs that someone's struggling with things. So that could leave a gap there potentially. I'm just wondering what you've done to kind of...
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's something that we're trying to be aware of is to design for different kinds of users and needs. I think we see the work that we're doing now as just one part of a much bigger set of work that hopefully over time will make the service better for others. So for example, you can imagine one day maybe there's a camera in the device or someone in the room that can actually track visually how a person is doing, and much like a doctor, also be intelligent to how a person appears. I think the reality is it's going to take us some time to get there. So I think what we hope to do, because again our mission is so big and challenging, is hopefully if we can start to serve some of the use cases somewhat, then we can work with our users to really develop that and start to serve everyone. But I think you're right, we should be really aware, and I think part of what this analysis gives us as well is a sense of what we're not going to be able to achieve with Alexa. So for example, the active listening is really important. That the nodding of the head is another thing that a doctor can do really well because they're physically in the room and they can gesture. So I think what this also helps us do is be very aware of the limitations and give us direction for what we can work on next to hopefully try serve everyone in the future. But that's a really good point.
How do you mitigate the risks of the machine not picking up something that it should have, and then having consequences on the health of the patient? I mean, I'm not sure how the process works, but like maybe the machine wouldn't pick something up, and then the patient would sue you because they got sick or whatever.
Yeah. But I think more than that as well. Like culturally at Babylon, although it sounds really really cheesy. I think we do on a personal level really believe in what we're trying to achieve, and we find it on a very personal level, like we really wouldn't want to do that, just very upsetting it. So we work really closely with regulators, and we're quite tightly regulated. And what that means is, obviously, if we're trying to kind of flesh out and test ideas early, that's fine. But anytime we get close to, or we start to think we might push something to the market, we have to run a series of tests, both in terms of user experience, but also accuracy of our model. And we have to meet certain thresholds before we're allowed to enter the market. And obviously it adds overhead to what we do, but we really invite it. It's really important to us that we work with regulators and others in the medical health industry, and we don't want to release anything that will do any harm.
Last question. Great, thanks so much for coming and taking the time to teach us about some really leading edge stuff here in London. It's great. I'm interested in the question of, in technical terms, probabilistic versus deterministic, or more non-technical, traditional software. When you design an experience, you have buttons and you have menus, and you click on them or you don't, right? Or a menu, you select items. And so the experience you're designing for is fairly, well defined. You say, well, we don't want this menu, we don't want this. But when you're talking conversational, there are elements that are more statistical in nature. So I'm curious about what your design process is about when basically there will be situations like when I demonstrated the Zoe chatbot, where you literally don't know what it will do, and how do you have confidence that it's still going to deliver within the parameters that you wanted it to?
That's a really interesting question. So basically, in terms of design process, what we try to do is work really closely with the people who develop the technology and try to develop as much of a sense as we can about how it works. And then, but more practically as well, to the point of kind of meeting regulatory constraints, but also for ourselves, we just do like a ton of testing. So we do a lot of work to really define well what are the kinds of conditions that we serve, also who are the which kinds of patients we don't serve, and for the ones where we do serve, we have a lot of test cases and we do a lot of testing, and that gives us a really strong sense of how it performs, but also some of the pitfalls, some of where it falls short. So we just spend a lot of time really using the system. And also sometimes you have to put in a hard-coded rule. Sometimes to be extra safe, if we're not sure about something, we will still hard-code something, for example, as and when we need to. I think the key thing is that we always prioritize safety first. So that will be the first concern. And then where we can be more open, we will try to be, but we just do a lot of testing to really be users of the product and understand it really well.